If you've lived in or grown up in the city of Brisbane, chances are that you've heard about something called World Expo 88. Maybe you encountered one of the many monuments in Brisbane dedicated to it. Or perhaps your parents told you some stories about the time they were there. Either way, it seems like it was a pretty big deal. So what exactly was Expo? Expo was a World's Fair that ran for 6 months in Brisbane during the year of 1988. Like the Olympics, World's Fairs, or World Expos as they are also known, are regular international events held at various major cities around the world. But what was so important about Expo to Brisbane? Brisbane was always viewed as an isolated country town compared to the major metropolitan centres of Melbourne and Sydney, and an unlikely contender for something like the World's Fair. Many will tell you that Expo was the turning point for Brisbane and the catalyst for helping it grow and change into the widely renowned city it is today. And all of this was occurring while Brisbane was undergoing a political and cultural shift of its own in the late 1980s. Southbank Parklands, a well-known recreational public park on the Brisbane riverbank, is what now currently sits on the former Expo location. So where were all the Expo sites formerly located on Southbank? Where were the pavilions, the sites, the rides, and everything else? What got built in their place, and what got left behind? In the 35th anniversary of the carnival that changed Brisbane, join us as we search for Expo then and now. The South Brisbane area is traditionally known as Kurilpa and was inhabited by the Yagara and Turrbal peoples. The riverbank was a convenient resource area for the locals, providing fish, fruit, and various materials for building gunya huts. Much of the Kurilpa site still holds importance to the local indigenous community to this day. Upon European settlement, the southern bank of the river was to become the central city district of Brisbane, but it was prone to regular flooding. Instead, the area became the first port of Brisbane. Once the port was moved, the area became largely industrial and residential, which copped a blow in the 1974 floods. Many urban renewal projects were proposed until it was chosen as the site for World Expo 88. The Expo site was originally built across Grey Street and Stanley Street, two main thoroughfares of South Brisbane when it was the city's port. A 40-hectare parcel of land was acquired, slowly cleared, and transformed into the Expo site during the mid-1980s. This transformation of the area was not without controversy and opposition, as many residents and businesses within the South Brisbane area were forced to leave. Much of Grey Street was removed from the main Expo area, and after the fair came to a close, Grey Street was eventually reinstated. South Brisbane over the years gradually became the gentrified inner city suburb now occupying the space today. If you could beat the crowds, there were two main entrances into Expo, both located outside the two train stations of South Brisbane, the Melbourne Street Gate and the Vulture Street Gate. The Melbourne Street Gate sat between the South Brisbane train station and the Lyric Theatre, and is now the entrance into the Grey Street Village. The Vulture Street Gate is now occupied by the entrance to Griffith University's South Brisbane campus. Once entering, patrons would arrive at a landing section surrounded by pavilions for Australia, Queensland, and numerous Australian states. Expo's parades were held within this section and provided patrons with a spectacle of light and colour every single night. Much of this area is now occupied by part of the Grey Street Village, the Queensland Conservatorium of Music and numerous hotels occupying where these pavilions once stood. One of the largest pavilions at Expo, the Queensland Pavilion, was a popular sight, taking tourists on a journey through the many wonders of Queensland via its people mover. The northern end of the pavilion overlooked the river, and much of its former location is now taken up by the Southbank Piazza. Further down was the China Pavilion. Filled with a variety of historic Chinese art and sculptures, this pavilion was easily recognised by its tall, ornamental gateway. The site of the Chinese Pavilion is now the restaurant and retail areas of the village. Getting from one side of the fair to the other was assisted by the Expo monorail, which sadly also made the chopping block once the fair ended. However, a small part of the Southbank Arbour Walk near the ship inn follows a piece of the original monorail track, This was near the original location of the Malaysia Pavilion. Many of Expo's international pavilions line where a lot of Grey Street's buildings are today. These include the Japan Pavilion and its Techno Plaza, the lagoon that took up the New Zealand and Pacific Island pavilions, and now occupied by the restaurants and apartments of Stanley Street, and some of the corporate pavilions toward the Vulture Street end of the Parklands, now occupied by the Plough Inn and numerous apartment buildings. The Aquacade was a popular entertainment spot near the river from the Vulture Street entrance. Many audiences would enjoy watching a professional diving or swimming show, so long as their seats weren't wet. The Aquacade is now occupied by a set of restaurants at the Vulture Street edge of the Southbank Parklands. And neighbouring the Aquacade was the Boardwalk, Expo's riverside outdoor dining area. Outdoor dining, would you believe, had been illegal in Brisbane up until 1988. Many lobbied for the Boardwalk restaurants to become a permanent feature of Southbank, which it kind of did. The former area of the Boardwalk is now a riverside amphitheatre and picnic area, where the current riverside restaurants overlook. Heading back along the waterfront edge toward the Melbourne Street Gate were numerous other international pavilions. There was the British Pavilion, the Italian Pavilion, and the USA Pavilion, which is now where the Southbank Park beaches are located. Opposite the USA Pavilion was the Spanish Pavilion. Here is where the Stanley Street Plaza is currently located, with numerous shops, places to eat, and the well-known Plough Inn Hotel, which we'll talk about later. World Expo 88 was the final appearance of the Soviet Union before its dissolution. Its pavilion offered a stunning look into Soviet culture, art, and technology. Where the pavilion sat is now the location of the Wheel of Brisbane, a Ferris wheel overlooking the river that was added to the Southbank Parklands in 2008. Behind the Expo Fair's main area was the amusement park called World Expo Park. It had 3 roller coasters along with various other rides, and admission to the park was included in a ticket to Expo. World Expo Park was originally intended to stay after the end of Expo, but was closed down in October of 1989 due to low attendance. The park site was once again cleared, with many of its rides given to various parks in Australia and overseas. The Brisbane Convention and Exhibition Centre was built in its place, constructed in 1993 and opened in 1995. World Expo Park remains one of the shortest-lived amusement parks in Australia. After all the walking and sightseeing was done, visitors would often head to the Munich Festhaus and have a drink or several, and maybe a dance to some Bavarian folk tunes. In its place is where the ABC Brisbane television studios now reside. These studios were added to the Southbank Parklands in 2012. By nightfall, patrons could enjoy a performance at the Expo River Stage, followed by a nightly fireworks display. The River Stage was also the setting for both the fair's opening and closing celebrations, and held concerts by numerous performers from around the country and overseas. Where the River Stage formerly sat is now part of the Riverside Walk, and the River Stage's seating area is now occupied by Southbank's urban rainforest. So, what remained? After Expo closed in October of 1988, just about everything was demolished, bar a few exceptions. Some structures and sculptures were simply moved to different places, while some other parts of Expo stayed in place right here at Southbank. Perhaps one of the most notable of all the mainstays is the Night Companion. Also known as the Sky Needle, this 88-metre tower was a prominent landmark at Expo 88, and upon the fair's end, it was scheduled to be moved to Tokyo Disneyland. However, Brisbane hairdressing tycoon Stephen Ackery purchased the tower and had it moved from its original location to his headquarters just a few streets down. This is where the Sky Needle Tower has remained ever since, and is now a feature of a recent apartment complex. Where the Sky Needle originally sat is now the location of one of many hotels in Grey Street. The Nepalese Peace Pagoda was originally located at the fair's Vulture Street entrance. After the fair's closure, the pagoda was soon transferred to the Southbank riverfront, just near the Wheel of Brisbane. It is open to the public throughout the day and contains many items of Expo memorabilia. The original pagoda site lay dormant for over 20 years before getting redeveloped into an apartment complex at the end of Southbank. The Japanese gardens, part of the Japan Pavilion, were rebuilt at the Mount Coot Botanical Gardens and still remain as one of the garden's most popular sites. Two of Southbank's watering holes, the Ship Inn and the Plough Inn, hold the distinction of remaining in South Brisbane since their original construction before Expo. Both pubs were opened in the 19th century and thrived while the South Brisbane area was the city's port. Once the port was moved, the pubs struggled until the Ship Inn was closed soon after the Brisbane 1974 floods. Both pubs were restored for Expo and continue to trade within the Southbank Parklands today. Following the closure of the South Brisbane port, the former dry dock was converted into the Maritime Museum in the 1960s and was featured at the Expo. It continues as a tourist attraction today, and Expo's Pavilion of Promise building now serves as the museum's hall. Of course, we can't forget to mention the numerous art pieces that were scattered throughout the Expo area. So many of these sculptures have been relocated to various parts of Queensland. The famous silo sculpture of the Queensland Primary Industries Pavilion was moved to the town of Biloela and is now a major tourist attraction there, part of Australia's big things. Various Expo sculptures can be spotted throughout inner-city Brisbane's public areas. Perhaps you may have walked past a few of them, from Spring Hill's Victoria Park, Upper Edward Street, to the cliffs at Kangaroo Point. Human Factor was a series of statue sculptures featured prominently throughout Expo. Many of these sculptures still stand around Brisbane today, and some still even remain in Southbank. And of course, Ken Doan's Australia 88 letter sculptures. Initially a part of the Australia Pavilion, these were moved to the Bruce Highway as a roadside display until the highway was revamped in the late 2000s. After being restored, they are now located at the Caboolture Historic Society north of Brisbane. So there you have it, a short guide on where many of Expo's sites were located in present-day Southbank and what has taken their places since. 35 years have passed since World Expo 88, and although the fair was held for just 6 months, the effect it had on the development of Brisbane was considerably profound. Brisbane itself has grown and changed exponentially over the last 35 years, from its isolated country town vibe to a major world city. Since Expo came and went, the Southbank Parklands have also continued to thrive as a cultural and tourist hotspot. And now, the city of Brisbane is preparing for its next major world event, the Summer Olympics, which will be held in July of 2032.